Hello and a warm welcome to our look ahead to what the papers are going to be bringing us this Thursday morning. With me, The Guardian's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha, and Times radio presenter, long-term political journalist, Tom Newton Dunn. Lovely to have both of you with us this evening. Thanks very much for looking through the papers. Let me bring you at home up to date with some of the front pages we've had so far this evening. The Metro looks at what it calls bombshell revelations, focusing on the former chief advisor to Boris Johnson's damning criticism both of the Prime Minister and of the Health Secretary Matt Hancock. The Telegraph does the same, referring to Mr Cummings' attack on the two men as revenge. The FT pays particular attention to the comments made about Mr Johnson after Dominic Cummings said he felt he was unfit to be Prime Minister. Mr Cummings also said tens of thousands of people died unnecessarily because of the government's response to the pandemic. That's the lead story in The Guardian, which quotes those remarks from Dominic Cummings. The Eye also looks at this line from his evidence, whilst noting that the chief scientific advisors, Patrick Vallance, and Chief Medical Officer Chris Whitty, were spared. Right, let's begin, if we may, Sonia, with the Daily Mail. Bombshell, was it?
I think it was a bombshell. There was a lot of speculation before today about how much impact this will make with the public, etc. But the truth is, it was a really, really significant day of testimony from the Prime Minister's former senior advisor. And I think the reason for that, it wasn't even so much, the fine-grained details that of Dominic Cummings' account that we got. And he said some pretty explosive things about Matt Hancock, accused Matt Hancock of lying on several occasions, some pretty explosive things about what the Prime Minister has said. At the end of the day, this is just one man's testimony, and when we get to a proper inquiry, we'll get a lot more testimonies to put into the mix. But I think what today provided us with was much more, was evidence that fills in the gaps of some of what we already knew about the government's really significant failings over the last 14 months. And so what we saw Cummings talk about, he talked about the issue with care homes, people being sent, into care homes out of hospital with no tests. He talked about sort of failures around PPE procurement, not just locking down too late in March, but really significantly the fact that we had a Prime Minister who came out of the first lockdown not saying, well, we should have locked down sooner, shouldn't we, so we didn't have to do it for as long, but actually we shouldn't have locked down at all. And it sounds like that really, really impacted on the Prime Minister's judgment. He held off introducing a lockdown in September, October, when scientific advisors were saying it's really needed. That's why a lot of experts think we've had such a deadly second wave. More people died in the second wave than the first wave. So I think this is just more evidence that fits with what we know already. It fits the jigsaw pieces that we already have about a Prime Minister who's completely unfit to govern. And, I don't agree with Dominic Cummings on much in this world, but I do agree with his assessment of the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's ability and capabilities to take tough political decisions during a national crisis.
And obviously, chief leader writer at The Guardian, you've got plenty to work with in a sense. And obviously, as a former advisor to Ed Miliband when he's leader of the Labour Party, you understand some of the kind of the politics of this and how this will be used over the coming weeks and months. Tom, you prowled the corridors of Westminster for many years, not least for The Sun as political editor. The front page of the Mail has 4 what it calls bombshells, quotes from him or remarks about him, including one about his own infamous road trip to Barnard Castle last year, which he says, I didn't tell you the truth, and gave an explanation why that was. Is there a danger with this that there are so many targets that actually even for the paper writers, even though they've had the luxury of watching the whole thing today and then they're writing it up for tomorrow, they're kind of losing the wood for the trees?
It's one of those days where it's actually really rather hard for journalists just to cram it all in, make some sense of extraordinary order. The military analogies are running thick and fast, aren't they? The Mail also has hand grenades. You could say Dom Cummings machine gunned pretty much everybody he could find in Whitehall yesterday, leaving bullet marks absolutely everywhere. And look what the Mail have done, page 1 and 2, and then from 4 to 15. Now, the Daily Mail, popular papers, don't set aside newspapers to that extent, unless they've got an awful lot to work with. It was an extraordinary performance. It was quite spellbinding. For an incredibly long time, all of us were transfixed to the screens for over 7 hours listening to all this. And yeah, it was really quite the reckoning. I think coming into this, A lot of people thought, well, look, we kind of know what happened. We know the government locked down too late twice, both in March and September. So what is Dominic Cummings going to tell us that we didn't already know? Two things I think that were really brand new for me. One was the sheer venom which he treated Matt Hancock with, and the allegations against Matt Hancock, which range from everything from failure to PPE to lying to the Prime Minister multiple times, including in the cabinet room, to doing things just to bolster his own ego. Extraordinarily devastating array of stuff. But the other thing that we didn't know is just all that extraordinary technicolor, those analogies from Independence Day, from Hollywood films, the highly colourful language we won't repeat on a respectable channel like BBC News Channel right here and now, from civil servants in blind panic what was going on. And you got a real sense, certainly I thought in the run-up to the March lockdown, of just the pandemonium, chaos and total terror that transfixed the entire government as they realised the country was going to be gripped by this appalling pandemic.
Now, the Eye often, Tom, does a lot of text, but here they've gone not only text in their headline, not only another sub-headline in yellow, but then they picked out chunks of text. I mean, there's a lot here for people to absorb. I mean, is there the danger that there is so much detail that actually most readers kind of don't really have time to go through this, and the papers are fascinated by it, but maybe the general public is, dare I say, not quite fascinated to that degree?
So you might say that. I think actually Dominic Cummings is one of those cut-through subjects. Everybody knows who he is. Everybody's got a view on him. He broke through during the famous Barnard Castle event, which was a year ago yesterday, and he sort of remained in the public consciousness ever since. Everybody loves a baddie, and Dominic Cummings has rather loved to culture that image of the baddie. Spitting Image, which is now back on our screens, also loved him there as well. So he does cut through. The powers of persuasion he has, the extraordinary arrogance he exudes, all create this sort of image that people love to know about. And certainly, we know our broadcasting figures shot up when he came on in front of the committee today. I expect paper sales will go up because people want to read about this guy for good and for bad. And
in fact, Sonia, as you quite rightly said, it affects all of us. Just looking at the Telegraph, Sonia, Cummings takes his revenge as he lays blame on Johnson and Hancock. I mean, picking up Tom's point, you could argue he's quite a Marmite figure in terms of public opinion. Perhaps people don't know all that. They might have seen the drama documentary about him played by Benedict Cumberbatch on Channel 4. That might have given a positive view, and then they might have got a negative view from what happened at Barnard Castle. Who knows? But in a sense, is that a potential problem in terms of reporting this story, that, people have almost made up their minds about him?
I think he's definitely a Marmite figure, but I don't think that really takes away from the seriousness of what he was saying today, unless you think he was kind of completely lying about it all. And for me, watching that testimony, it was so detailed and it went on for so long. I've got absolutely, he's not a totally reliable witness, and you should never just go on the account of one person as to what happened behind the scenes. This is why we really need a full public inquiry, and I think actually he was right to call for that.
And we do get, sorry, just very quickly, we do get Matt Hancock apparently in front of the House of Commons tomorrow, where he's going to answer some of these questions.
Definitely be one to watch. He'll be in front of the House of Commons. He'll also be giving a press conference to journalists apparently tomorrow evening. So he's got a lot to answer. There were a lot of extremely serious allegations about Matt Hancock that we hadn't heard before, about direct lies that he sort of told colleagues, which is incredibly serious. So I think we need to listen to what he's got to say in answer to that. But Dominic Cummings is very much a Marmite figure, but I don't think that detracts from the seriousness of what he was saying. And as I was saying, although he's not, we shouldn't regard him as a completely 100% reliable witness, a lot of what he's saying just kind of fits with what's been reported already, with the facts of what we know happened, the wrong decisions that the Prime Minister has taken. So it kind of fits with what we know. And so I think there's even people who aren't big fans of Dominic Cummings, who sort of really engage with this in some detail and will have watched the testimony today. Even if you don't really like the man, you don't like what he stands for, you don't think he's necessarily the most trustworthy of figures, you understand that he will have put his own spin on events. It's very clear that he's gunning for Boris Johnson and for Matt Hancock. He really sidestepped saying anything critical about Rishi Sunak, for example. There's no question there's his own spin on this. But the fact of the matter is when you take a step back, from the kind of quite soap opera nature of who said what when, the charges levelled against the Prime Minister are so serious and they stack up. It's his senior former advisor saying this guy is not fit to lead the country. He took terrible decisions. In fact, he just swerved all over the place like a supermarket shopping trolley. He was swayed by newspaper editorials rather than the scientific evidence.
Well, that's good news for your profession, isn't it?
Well, look, I think I write newspaper editorials. I think they're incredibly important.
You hope they're influential, yes.
But do I think that the Prime Minister should be looking at one newspaper's editorial and taking decisions about, a global pandemic based on that? Or do I think he should be listening to his scientific advisors? Obviously, in the observatory.
That's a rhetorical question.
The scientific consensus. So, I'm sure most journalists would want the Prime Minister to be listening to the scientific consensus. So, I think it's very, very significant. You just can't get away from that, no matter what you think about Dominic Cummings.
Sonia, thank you very much. Tom, another story in the front of the Telegraph, which perhaps on a different day might appear a bit more prominently on other papers. France orders UK 7-day quarantine.
Yeah, you've got a feeling that might just be splashed over every front page if it wasn't for the Dom shell that we're all treated to today. Really interesting story. I tell you what, Sean, who would book a foreign summer holiday anytime soon? Because here we go, just when we thought it was safe to go back into the travel agents, albeit France is not quite on the green list yet, still very much an amber list destination. Hopes abound that France would soon turn into a green list country. But before we can do that, guess what? They're banning us, or they're certainly quarantining us. And this is a story announced by France today that Britain was effectively going on France's amber list, a tit-for-tat amber list retaliation perhaps, but this is very much a French concern that because of the Indian variant that is circulating quite widely in the UK now, almost certainly the dominant variant everywhere, France are now very concerned about Brits going there. The Germans closed their borders to Brits a couple of days ago. The French are now following suit. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if much of Europe takes the same course. And in fact, even if we are allowed to go to Europe on holiday, we just simply won't be able to get in any longer.
No, that's very interesting, isn't it? Because we had only a few days ago, Sonia, the Spanish government saying, actually, no, we want you to come, you're welcome. Obviously, it's an amber country, so as you say, if you come back from Spain, you'd have to quarantine or self-isolate at home for a number of days and provide tests and so on. But that opened up the option. It's interesting, this is kind of a European level. We're now starting to see, again, very different approaches from governments which have different pressures on them, whether they're health pressures or economic ones.
That's right. Well, for every European government will be sort of trading off the costs of introducing quarantine on Brits coming into their countries versus, the cost to tourism versus the health benefits. And obviously for a country like Spain, I think Brits are sort of one of the biggest customers of Spanish tourism, as it were. So it would be very significant for Spain to sort of introduce a quarantine. But I do think, the irony of this is that actually we know, particularly when vaccination is proceeding apace and countries are starting to see immunity through vaccination build up in their populations, the biggest risk to the gains that you get from that is from variants being brought in from abroad. And the irony is, we've got European countries now starting to introduce quarantines for Brits coming in. This all goes back to the fact that actually our border policy is a bit of a mess and has been really critiqued, I think, by some scientists here in the UK. And Boris Johnson delayed putting India on the red list by 3 weeks back in early April, reportedly because he was so keen to go to India for his post-Brexit kind of the bagger post-Brexit trade deal. And we are paying the price for that now. We know from the data that during that period, travellers brought that variant into the UK. So I really think, the reason why today's evidence from Dominic Cummings is so relevant as well is because the pandemic is still a live issue.
Indeed.
It's going well at the moment with vaccines, but it could still be jeopardised. And we've still got the government not learning the lessons from things it's got wrong.
Tom, FT, a good news story, although I have to say this is a new word in my lexicon. Maybe you're ahead of me on this. A Gigafactory is coming to Sunderland.
So, Sean, I can tell you, just before we came on air, Sonia was very pleased to email me to tell me she knew what a Gigafactory was. She'd actually looked it up.
Sonia, sorry. Well, now you've dropped her in it. So go on, Sonia, you tell us what it is, and then Tom can follow up.
Very briefly what it is, and I'll hand over to Tom. So as I understand it, the giga just refers to billions, and it refers to the fact that these are very big, powerful batteries that are being built to power cars.
Brilliant. Over to you, Tom.
Yeah, that's exactly the Wikipedia entry she emailed me, and I said that's not substantial. I don't get it. So look, we're still feeling around the dark here what a gigafactory is. I think we can settle on the fact that
your honesty is admirable.
It's a mighty big old factory, isn't it? And it makes batteries.
Yes.
That we can settle on.
And batteries matter.
It is the batteries do matter. And also, I tell you what, Sunderland matters, Nissan matters, because, and that's the breakthrough here. This is a factory, a huge factory in Sunderland, employs thousands of people up there in the northeast. And there were huge concerns that after Brexit, Nissan were closed. Nissan said as much. Remember, huge ins and outs of Downing Street, the Nissan CEO going to see the former Prime Minister Theresa May asking for terms. And it would appear that the British government have indeed now satisfied Nissan. There's quite a bit of payola going on here. There's quite a lot of subsidies going on into this factory, especially with the cost of energy. The government is clearly subsidising to the tune of many millions energy source to make that energy supply a bit cheaper. So the Gigafactory can produce an awful lot of battery-made cars, battery-powered cars, 200,000 battery-powered cars a year. But look, it's got to be great news. May cost the taxpayer a few quid, but a huge amount of jobs are now, it would appear, going to be secure in Sunderland if this deal goes through.
There's an optimistic note to end this particular review on. Sonia Sodha and Tom Newton Dunn, thank you both very much. Thank you for that splendid display of teamwork. It's lovely to know you guys talk to each other before we come on air. I think that's great, isn't it? That's really good to know we're all trying to pull in the same direction and hopefully give you a bit more information at home. Thank you very much for joining Tom, Sonia and me. I'm going to be back at the top of the hour. They're going to be back at 1:30 to bring us up to date on the very latest front pages. Coming up next, though, sport and weather.